She didn't have a name that opened doors. She didn't have a voice anyone was listening to. But the moment she looked up, everything began to change. Elena Wade was supposed to remain invisible, a shadow behind the glass, a girl the system forgot, because forgetting was easier than facing her truth. Then one look, unplanned, steady, defiant, met the eyes of the most powerful man in the city, and he didn't look away. Why would a man like Adrian Locke, a billionaire built on silence and control, offer a girl like her an apartment, a platform, a future? Is it curiosity, control, redemption, or something more dangerous? She didn't ask to be seen. She didn't ask to belong. But now that the world has turned its gaze on her, will she step into the light or burn everything down just to stay free? This is not a romance. It's a revolt. It's a girl becoming a woman on her own terms, and a man who may have met his match not in power, but in purpose. If you've ever wanted to see a woman rise, not because she's saved, but because she chooses to rise, like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, now, step into the fire with us. The story begins. Elena had long stopped expecting to be noticed. Somewhere between her 4th group home and her 20th birthday, she had learned that the world often looked away from what it didn't know how to fix or couldn't figure out how to use. She was neither broken enough to be rescued, nor bright enough to be displayed. So she became a shadow, not quite invisible, but always on the outside looking in. She drifted through the forgotten corners of Newport, curled up beside heat vents behind diners that never closed, dozing off in bus stations where the benches were cold and the lights never slept. She rinsed her clothes in an alley sink behind an old auto shop and took whatever work came without too many questions, sweeping, lifting, cleaning. Her hours were paid in coins and silence. The only place she ever felt untouchable was inside her own mind, a fortress built from pages torn out of discarded novels and the shaky but fierce voices of preachers on street corners, shouting to the sky like it might still listen. Elena didn't believe in plans. She believed in getting through the next morning. And that morning had come like all the others, drenched in wind, damp with cold, and lined with the quiet ache of survival. She stood on the sidewalk in front of one of Newport's tallest towers, wiping down the endless wall of glass with a rag that had outlived its softness and a cleaner that stung her fingers. Her arms trembled from effort. Her hands, red from the wind, gripped the bottle like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She never looked up. Eye contact meant risk, curiosity, questions, worse pity, but something made her do it that day. She paused and lifted her gaze, and there, behind the spotless windows of the 35th floor, a man stood watching, still as sculpture, dressed in black. No phone, no distraction. Just a simple glass of water held at his side and a presence that felt like it should belong in glossy magazines or political rooms. She didn't recognize him. Not yet. But he wasn't looking at her the way others did, not with threat. Not with suspicion. He looked at her like he had stumbled upon a riddle written on the side of his world. Their eyes met for a breath. It was brief, unspoken, but it stilled everything. She looked away first. She always did. That night, curled into the last booth of an all-night diner near Halston Bridge, sipping hot water through a chipped mug. Elena was trying to disappear into herself when a man approached. His coat was pressed, his shoes too polished for this part of the city. He said nothing, just placed a white envelope on the table and walked out without a glance. Inside was a card matte black, the name embossed in silver ink, Adrian Locke, CEO of Locke and Pierce Group, known for rebuilding cities, running power grids, and never being seen twice in the same room. On the back, an address and a single instruction: come, 8:30 in the morning. No later. Elena stared at it, her hands trembling slightly. A part of her wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to rip it in half. Men like that didn't invite girls like her into anything but silence. But something about that moment, the stillness, the certainty in his eyes had taken root. She didn't believe in rescue. But maybe, just maybe, this wasn't that. Elena never truly trusted people. Not strangers, not helpers, not even those who smiled too easily. But she trusted her instincts, the quiet pull in her chest that whispered when something wasn't quite right, or when, somehow, it was. And something about this man, this invitation, this impossibility felt different. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she stayed curled in the corner booth of the diner until the sky began to warm behind the rooftops and the night staff traded places with the morning crew. She borrowed a bathroom key, splashed her face with cold water, brushed her teeth with her finger, and tied her hair back using a strip of elastic she'd found on a discarded produce bag. She didn't own anything else to wear. So she wore what she always did, a faded black hoodie, ash-colored jeans, and a pair of sneakers that had split open at the toe months ago. At 8:40, she stood outside the address printed on the card. It was a different tower now, taller, sharper, colder in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Twice. She turned to leave. Twice. She stopped herself. Then, without her touching a thing, the glass doors parted. A woman in a midnight blue suit stepped outside. Miss Elena Wade. Elena gave a slight nod. Come with me. They rode the elevator in silence. The woman's name badge read Vivian Sharp, and her gaze was the kind that rarely blinked. Her voice, when she had spoken, had been clipped, like someone who didn't bother with repetition. At the top floor, the elevator doors opened to a space that took Elena a moment to comprehend. White, chrome, stone. The air hummed with silence. The light was everywhere, but it didn't warm anything. Vivian guided her down a hall lined with nothing but glass. Inside one of the rooms sat a man behind a desk of dark wood and steel. He looked up as she entered. Adrian Locke. The man from the window. He didn't greet her. Not really. He simply said, "You came," as if that had proven something he already suspected. Elena didn't sit until Vivian motioned toward the chair. Adrian studied her with a kind of stillness that felt more like calculation than curiosity. "You're with Whitecrest Cleaning," he said. She gave a small nod. "You never completed the employment paperwork. I'm day labor. Cash. You've never had a record. Never applied for aid. Haven't stepped into a shelter in more than 4 years." She blinked. "You looked into me. I make a habit of knowing who works around my buildings." His tone wasn't threatening. It was quiet, flat, honest. Then he said, "I'm offering you a trial residency. Half a year. No rent. In a private apartment." She stared. In exchange, he continued, "You'd take part in a new initiative. We're building a program focused on people who live between systems. Capable, intelligent, overlooked. There are no public obligations, no press, just occasional assessments and a few personal benchmarks." She narrowed her eyes. "Why me?" "Because you looked back." The answer stopped her. He leaned forward, setting the tablet aside. "Most people in your position, they keep their eyes down. They disappear. You didn't. You looked up, and you didn't flinch. Maybe I didn't think you were someone to fear," she said, her voice low. He smiled. "Just barely. Even better." Elena stood slowly. "What's in it for you?" He paused, thoughtful. Maybe data, maybe control, maybe something I haven't defined yet. She tilted her head. "I don't trust you. I'm not asking for trust." Vivian stepped forward and handed her a slim folder. Inside were a security card, a handwritten code, an unsigned agreement, and a building map. Elena held it in both hands. "I'll go," she said, "but only if I can walk away whenever I want. You can. And if I never speak to you again." He didn't blink. "Then I'll wait. Or I won't." He stood, walked to the far window. "You're not here to be shaped," he said, his voice quiet. "You're here to figure out who you want to be." That night, she unlocked the door to an apartment that was bigger than the entire shelter floor she used to sleep on. And for the first time in years, she didn't brace herself as she stepped inside. Elena didn't reach for the lights. She lingered in the doorway, her fingers grazing the smooth edge of the wall, and simply breathed. No one had ever handed her a key without also handing her a list of rules. But this place, this quiet, pristine space, had opened its doors to her without condition. Adrian hadn't asked her to smile, or to explain the scars she carried. He hadn't tried to reshape her or soften her edges. And yet, standing there, she could feel it deep in her chest. Something irreversible had just begun. Not rescue, recognition. That night, she hadn't made it to the bed. Instead, she had curled up in the oversized chair near the window, fully clothed, arms wrapped tightly around herself like armor she wasn't ready to shed. When morning came, she woke to silence so dense it felt like a physical weight pressing against her skin. The apartment was still foreign, too sleek, too untouched. Light crept in through pale curtains, shifting gently with the breath of the vents. The air smelled like something carefully chosen eucalyptus and faint linen, as if even the air had been curated. She hadn't touched the bed, couldn't. The thought of lying beneath sheets that cost more than an entire week of her life on the street made her feel like she might disappear inside them. She wasn't ready to belong to anything this soft. The space was perched high above the city, on the 36th floor of Locke Tower. A silent monument made of glass and steel, lit by sensors and automated warmth. Everything responded to her presence, the lights, the doors, even the interface near the entrance that displayed the weather and meal options. It felt less like a home and more like a machine waiting to be programmed. She moved slowly through each room, touching only what she had to. The kitchen was lined with glass jars filled with dry grains, fresh fruit arranged like a catalog, and a refrigerator stocked with perfectly portioned meals, each labeled by time, like she needed help remembering when to eat. She opened drawers, not out of need, but defiance, just to prove to herself that she could. In the bathroom, a robe still wrapped in plastic hung beside unscented toiletries and a toothbrush that had never been used. She brushed her teeth in silence, staring at a reflection that looked too clean, too pale under the soft white lights. The dark smudges under her eyes had started to fade, but the alertness remained. Not beauty. Awareness. The kind that never fully sleeps. No knock came, no voice called out, no one told her where to be. For a moment, Elena feared this was all a mistake, that someone would come and tell her to leave, that she was trespassing. She made herself a cup of coffee from the sleek built-in machine and sat at the marble island, holding the warm mug with both hands. The silence wasn't kind. It made her feel like she might vanish into the floor if she let go of herself for even a second. Then, at exactly 10:10, the wall screen near the door glowed softly. Appointment confirmed. 11 o'clock. Dr. Lydia Chase. Wellness floor. Room 7. Bravo. No instructions, no explanation, just a name, a time. Elena stared at it for a long moment, then made a quiet decision. She would go. But not because they asked her to, because she chose to. At 10:30, she stepped into the elevator alone. No escort, no surveillance, just her reflection in the mirrored walls, standing straighter than she had in days. The tower's corridors were lined with minimalist art and soft lighting pieces that looked like they belonged in private galleries, not hallways. But no one stared at her. No one asked questions. She walked as if she belonged, and for the first time, no one argued with that. No one looked twice at her. Elena moved through the corridors like she was made of smoke, quiet, weightless, unremarkable. The wellness floor, nestled somewhere in the upper levels of Locke Tower, greeted her not with sterility, but with hush. Soft lighting fell across frosted glass doors, each one etched in silver script. Her footsteps barely made a sound. Room 7. Bravo waited at the end of the corridor. She paused, knocked once, then turned the handle. The space inside was warm, unexpectedly warm, not in temperature, but in spirit. Books lined wooden shelves from floor to ceiling. Sunlight poured in through a tall window behind 2 chairs placed not across a desk, but across a small round table. There were no screens, no keyboards, just silence, light, and a strange kind of welcome. A woman stood as Elena entered mid-40s, hair streaked with silver, face bare, eyes calm but weathered. She extended a hand. "Elena, I'm glad you came." Elena didn't take the hand. She just gave a slow nod and sat in the chair farthest from the sun. The woman, Dr. Lydia Chase, didn't seem surprised. She simply sat across from her and folded her hands neatly. "I'm not here to assess you," she said gently. "I'm just here. If you ever feel like talking." "I don't." Elena's voice was flat. "That's all right." They sat in quiet for a while, not tense, just unmoving. Then Elena broke it. "Is this mandatory? Adrian asked if I'd meet with you once a week. Asked, or instructed technically. Nothing is required. But he can be persuasive." Elena leaned back, arms crossed. "So, let me get this straight. He brings me to the top of his glass kingdom, hands me an apartment nicer than any life I've ever lived, and now he wants me to unpack my soul for a stranger, I think," Lydia said with the smallest smile. "He just wants to see if you'll speak. At all." Elena let out a dry laugh. "That sounds about right." Lydia tilted her head. "You don't trust him. I trust him to be exactly who he is. And who is that A-man who can't stand not being in control?" Lydia didn't argue. She let the truth settle. Elena narrowed her gaze. "So what am I to him? A case study, some project to make him feel charitable? I don't believe that," Lydia replied. "But I do think you unsettle something in him. And people like him don't enjoy not understanding their own instincts. So, he watches me. I imagine he does." Elena didn't know how to feel about that. A piece of her curled inward, sharp with resistance. Another piece, small but stubborn, felt strangely visible. "I'm not here to be fixed," she murmured. "No," Lydia agreed softly. "But you might still grow." The rest of the session passed like a slow dance between silence and sarcasm. Elena never gave a full answer. She tossed out questions with an edge, made dry jokes, and at one point asked if Lydia got paid per awkward pause. And yet, something about the room felt different. Not comforting, exactly, but safe. Safe in a way that didn't demand anything back. She left, not because she had opened up, but because she had stayed on her own terms. Shoulders back, chin steady. Back in the apartment, a box waited for her on the marble counter. No card, no label, just her name, handwritten with care. Inside a pair of sleek wireless earbuds, and a note folded once. "You don't have to hear me, but you can choose to listen." She didn't have to guess who it came from. That night, she lay on top of the untouched blankets, earbuds nestled in her ears. She didn't play music. She just let the quiet wrap around her like a softer kind of silence, one that didn't echo loneliness, but possibility. Maybe, just maybe, someone wasn't trying to fix her. Maybe someone was just waiting for her to arrive as herself, on her own terms, and that, somehow, was the most radical invitation of all. The apartment, though still untouched by memory, no longer felt like a cage. It was more like a blank canvas, one that hadn't yet been claimed, but waited patiently for the brush of her presence. Elena began adjusting to its quiet rhythm, that strange balance between freedom and surveillance. No one knocked, no one told her how to behave, no one even hinted that she owed anyone anything, and yet, in the silence, she felt his presence, not like a shadow, like a blueprint. Adrian Locke was a man who didn't raise his voice or write memos. He designed spaces that spoke for him. Every corner whispered intention. Every hallway held quiet expectation. She began to notice the details, the way the hallway lights softened as she passed, as if the building itself adjusted to her pace. How the fridge always seemed to refill with the exact things she reached for: dark bread, green apples, black coffee, nothing sweet. How the closet, once nearly empty, now held pieces in her size and in her colors: charcoal, ink blue, ash gray, no flowers, no frills, no performance. Someone had paid attention. Maybe him, maybe someone he trusted. Either way, Elena wasn't sure whether to feel watched or understood. She was starting to learn something: power doesn't always thunder. Sometimes it breathes. Each morning, the wall panel lit up with a new itinerary: optional sessions, quiet reading periods, movement classes, conversations with Dr. Chase. Nothing was forced, nothing was forbidden. But Elena wasn't naive. She chose just enough to stay inside the lines, and ignored just enough to remember where the edges were. It became a quiet game, one no one named, but everyone seemed to play. Then came the fourth day. At midday, her schedule shifted. A message blinked onto the screen. "Mr. Locke would like to see you. 1 o'clock. West Wing. 39th floor. No file. No context. Just a time. Just a place." At 2 minutes before the hour, she stood outside the conference room door. Her reflection caught in the deep black gloss like a memory reframed. She looked different, not refined like the women she saw on lobby posters, but stripped down, leaner, clearer, like someone who had finally left behind a weight she was never meant to carry. She touched the collar of her fitted sweater, black, clean, simple. Another item that had appeared without being asked for. Then she opened the door. The room stretched long and cool, paneled in dark wood, matte steel, and intent. At the far end stood a screen tall as the wall. Seated around the table were 6 people, executives, no doubt, tailored suits, polished stares, quiet assessments, and at the head of it all, Adrian. He didn't rise, didn't smile, just lifted a hand and gestured to the seat beside him. Elena didn't hesitate. She walked forward slowly, spine steady, chin up. She felt every eye following her. But she didn't flinch. She had walked through colder rooms, darker places. This was nothing she couldn't handle. As she sat, Adrian finally spoke. "Everyone, this is Miss Elena Wade." He didn't wait for introductions. He didn't soften the silence. "You've seen the projections," he said. "This isn't a gesture of goodwill. It's an investment, long-term, human potential. At scale." A man with silver hair and a fountain pen clipped like a badge of pride leaned forward from across the table. His voice was polite, too polite. "Pardon me, but what exactly is her role in all this?" Adrian didn't turn his head. "That depends," he said calmly. on what she decides it should be. Elena arched a brow. Ah, so that was today's game. Another man, clean-cut, younger, wearing his arrogance like a well-fitted suit, chimed in. No degrees, no credentials, no corporate experience. And we're planning to place her as the public face of this initiative. Adrian didn't flinch. Yes, his voice was even, but the room tensed like a string pulled too tight. Elena placed her hands calmly on the table. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but sharp. Do you really think people like me don't already exist in your systems? She let the silence stretch. You just don't usually have to look us in the eye. Adrian didn't smile, but a flicker passed through him, an acknowledgement, subtle and sure. She's agreed to take part in the Human Futures Division. He continued. She'll advise on community engagement, mentoring frameworks, and transitional housing solutions, effective immediately. The younger man scoffed. She has. Elena turned her head toward him, eyes steady. Apparently, I have. The meeting moved forward, but her voice receded. She listened instead, watched how the others deferred to Adrian's rhythm, how his words rarely needed repetition. He didn't command the room with force. He simply was the room. But when he spoke to her, something shifted. Not warmth, not protection, just a deeper kind of attention, like he was listening for what hadn't yet been said. When the meeting ended, the others left in a quiet shuffle of tailored coats and half-curious glances. Only she and Adrian remained. You could have told me this was coming, Elena said, folding her arms. I didn't want you to prepare. I wanted to see what you did with surprise. She looked at him, skeptical, and you didn't flinch. She looked down for a beat, then back at him. I've flinched before. It never helped. He stood and walked to the window, hands tucked into his pockets. His voice was low. You know what they see when they look at you. She didn't answer. A complication, a question mark, something they can't fit into a slide deck. And what about you? She asked, stepping beside him. He didn't look at her directly. I see someone who's never been given permission to be dangerous. She inhaled quietly. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was electric. I'm not your metaphor, she said. I'm not a phoenix. I'm not a headline. I'm not some pretty redemption arc they can dress in clean clothes. I know. Then why keep me here? He turned to her. Just slightly, because when you walk into a room, people forget what they thought they knew. She should have stepped back, put space between them, but she didn't. You scare me sometimes, she said, barely louder than a breath. He didn't move. I scare myself. They stood like that for a while, two people molded by silence, both too familiar with survival, now staring at something that felt like risk. For the first time since she arrived, Elena didn't know who was changing more, herself, or the man who had brought her here. But one thing was certain, neither of them would leave this story unchanged. Later that evening, she stood in front of a full-length mirror, barefoot on soft carpet, hands by her sides. The girl looking back wasn't the one who had once slept in shelters or curled up in corners of forgotten buildings. This reflection wasn't polished, but it was steady, and maybe, for the first time, hers. The dress was nothing like anything she had ever worn. Dark green, deep as forest shadows, fitted without clinging, sleeveless but not suggestive, elegant, understated, expensive in a way that whispered, not screamed. Vivian had delivered it without ceremony. Her voice clipped as always. He wants you to look appropriate tonight. No other instructions. Now. As Elena stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the neckline for the third time, her fingers brushed against her bruised knuckles. There was something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, a tremor that wasn't quite fear, but held the same charge. She didn't know what the evening required of her, only that she was being offered up to a room that didn't make space for women like her unless it was for show. She wasn't nervous. She was taut with anticipation, like a violin string waiting to be drawn across. When she stepped out of the room, Vivian didn't offer praise, just handed her a black clutch and said, "Don't speak unless you're asked. Stay to Adrian's left. Don't respond to the press. If you're unsure, look at him." Elena narrowed her eyes. "Do you give this same speech to all the women he brings along?" Vivian's gaze didn't waver. "You're not a companion. You're his disruption," oddly. That felt comforting. The car ride passed in silence. Adrian, seated beside her in a charcoal three-piece suit, seemed carved from stillness. Silver buttons gleamed at his cuffs, and the weight of his presence felt deliberate, as if he were anchoring the entire car by sheer gravity. He glanced at her more than once, as if he wasn't entirely sure she was real. She didn't ask where they were going. He didn't offer. The estate rose from the outskirts of the city like a fortress dressed in ivy, stone walls, polished drive, a kind of grandeur that had never touched hardship. Inside, chandeliers poured light like waterfalls, and servers glided through with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres Elena couldn't even name. The scent of money was in the air, aged wood, perfume, entitlement. As they entered the hall, eyes turned. Of course they did. She wasn't familiar, wasn't pedigree, wasn't expected. She was young, silent, and unplaceable, and that made her unpredictable. Adrian didn't introduce her. He didn't need to. He kept her close, like a statement without explanation, and moved through the crowd with the precision of a man used to being watched. He was courteous, but cool, sharp, but never careless. And the longer Elena stayed at his side, the more she began to understand. This night wasn't about celebration. It was about control. Halfway through the evening, a man approached. No name tag, no smile. His face was worn in the way power gets when it's never been challenged. He looked at Elena as if she were a question he had already answered. "This her?" he asked Adrian, not even glancing in her direction. Adrian's jaw flexed. "This is Elena Wade." The man gave a low, cynical laugh. "Interesting choice. Bit young. Don't you think?" Before Adrian could reply, Elena stepped forward. Her voice was calm, steady. "Is that a question about my age? Or your insecurity?" The man blinked, unprepared. Adrian's fingers flexed once at his side, subtle but sharp, like something in him had tensed. But he said nothing. The man gave a low, cruel laugh. "Fiery one. Isn't she? That mouth will cost her once the novelty wears off." Elena didn't blink. She tilted her head, voice even. "I've faced men much worse than you." A pause. "And I didn't regret surviving them either." That was enough. He walked away, muttering about how power made men foolish. Adrian stayed quiet for a while after that. Then, in a low voice, he finally said, "You didn't have to respond. He insulted you." She answered, and he tried to do it through me. He turned fully toward her, then not with anger. Not even surprise, but something closer to a reckoning. He didn't see a girl in a borrowed dress. He saw the sharp edges of a survivor who didn't wait for permission. There was no gratitude in his eyes, just awe. And, perhaps, a little fear. Later that evening, Elena stood by a tall window overlooking the garden. She didn't move, just watched reflections pass men with fortunes sewn into their cuffs. Women sculpted into roles they'd learned to perform. She wondered if she would ever stop feeling like she was trespassing. Adrian joined her without a word, a drink in his hand. untouched. "You were flawless tonight," he said quietly. "I wasn't trying to be. That's exactly why you were." She turned toward him, brow furrowed. "Why bring me here? I wanted to see what happened when the room tried to shrink you, and you didn't shrink," he said. "You made the room breathe differently." The air between them shifted. Not closeness, not distance, something in between, something unnamed. She whispered, "What am I to you?" He didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "I don't know yet, but I know you're not someone I'll forget." The ride back was quieter than the one before. But this time, the silence wasn't hollow. It was thick with things neither of them could say, but neither of them denied. That night, Elena changed slowly, letting the dress fall from her shoulders like an old skin she didn't need anymore. She stood barefoot on cold tile, staring out at the constellation of lights that was Newport below. She was not the same girl who had walked into that estate. And Adrian was not the same man who had brought her there, whatever was forming between them. It wasn't soft, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying part. The following days felt like something had shifted, even if no one spoke it aloud. The morning after the gala, Adrian didn't reach out. No message, no request, no appearance. It wasn't silence, it was restraint. His version of giving her space. And she wasn't sure if that steadied her or unsettled her more. Elena filled her hours deliberately. She spent time in the private lounge attached to the wellness floor, absorbing digital articles, reports, documents on urban planning, social infrastructure. Most of it went over her head. But she read anyway, hungry to understand the world she'd somehow been dropped into. She didn't want to be still. Stillness made space for doubt, and doubt, for someone like her, could be fatal. She met with Dr. Lydia Chase again, this time for longer. They didn't dissect her emotions. They talked about perception, identity, how society loves to label people by where they come from instead of where they're going. Elena didn't offer much, but she asked questions, and for now, that was enough. Elena didn't cry. She didn't unravel, didn't pour herself out hoping someone would stitch her together. But for the first time, she admitted something aloud. Sometimes, being seen was more terrifying than being invisible. Dr. Lydia Chase didn't react. She simply nodded and said, "Being seen means being vulnerable, but it also means you finally exist." Elena wasn't sure she liked the sound of that. On Thursday evening, Vivian arrived without warning, sharp lines, clipped steps, no wasted movement. She handed Elena a sealed envelope. "You're on the guest list for the Locke Global Summit next week," she said. "Adrian added your name himself." Elena stared at the envelope, then at Vivian. "Why? Because whatever he sees in you," Vivian said, her voice firm. "He thinks the world needs to see it too." There was no room for argument. The summit was to be held at the new Lock Edge campus, a glass and stone compound along the lakefront. It was where real influence moved away from headlines, behind closed doors. This wasn't a charity gala or a photo op. This was global, strategic, serious. Elena didn't know what she was meant to do, but Vivian's presence had made one thing clear. It wasn't a choice. That weekend, everything shifted. Elena went out alone, something she hadn't done in weeks. No dress, no heels, no eyes on her. Just a black hoodie, worn jeans, no makeup. She wasn't trying to hide. She just wanted to not exist for a little while. She walked the riverfront, bought a coffee from a weathered cart, and settled on a bench overlooking the water. Headphones in. World dimmed. For the first time in days, the noise inside her stilled, until she saw him. Across the street, leaning against a rusted car, arms folded, Posture lazy, but dangerous. Dean Cray. A name she hadn't said aloud in more than a year. A ghost from the life she'd clawed her way out of. He had never hurt her. Not physically. But he had owned silence, traded it, manipulated it, used it like a leash. Once, he'd offered her safety. At a price. And now, here he was, looking at her like she was still something he hadn't finished with. Elena stood up too quickly. Coffee spilled down her wrist. She didn't run. She just moved fast, steady, controlled. 2 turns. 3 blocks. She ducked into a used bookstore that smelled of old paper and anonymity. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. He had seen her. By the time she returned to the tower, her face was calm. But her pulse had never stopped running. She scanned in, rode the elevator to her floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at a wall that didn't blink. She told no one. Not Vivian. Not Dr. Chase. Certainly not Adrian. She didn't want to be protected, didn't want anyone's pity. She just wanted to become the version of herself who never looked back. 2 nights later, she woke to the sound of paper sliding softly under her door. An envelope. No markings. But the handwriting sharp. Angular was unmistakable. Adrian's. You weren't followed. I checked. You're not alone here. Elena. Don't forget that. She didn't know how he knew. Had someone told him? Had he seen it himself? She should have been furious. It was a violation. A breach of the boundary she worked so hard to build. But instead, she felt something colder. Deeper. That night, sleep wouldn't come. So just after midnight, she left the apartment and rode the elevator to the rooftop garden she had stumbled on 2 days earlier. It was empty. The air was sharp, the sky wide open, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself stand still with nothing to prove, and no one to convince that she belonged. Elena stood near the edge of the rooftop garden, arms folded tightly around her torso, her breath rising slow and steady into the night air. Below her, the city shimmered cold and brilliant, like a secret trying too hard to stay hidden. Adrian's voice came from behind, quiet and careful. Did he frighten you? She didn't turn. Not as much as what I nearly let myself become because of him. He stepped beside her, close but not imposing. His coat brushed lightly against her sleeve. There was tension in the space between them, not danger, but a kind of electricity held back by choice. You've built your life on keeping people at arm's length, she said, eyes still fixed on the skyline. So why cross the line now, because I've watched too many people I care about disappear in silence, he said. And I don't want to watch it happen again. She turned to face him. Slowly. You care, I do. He didn't flinch. And what happens? She asked. When caring becomes inconvenient. His voice didn't waver. I'm not afraid of inconvenience. I'm afraid of pretending I feel nothing when I do. She inhaled softly, not because of the words themselves, but because it was the first time his voice carried no defense, no agenda, just truth. I don't trust easily, she murmured, eyes falling. I'm not asking you to, he said. I'm asking you to stay honest. They didn't speak after that. They stood side by side, the wind tugging at their clothes, the sky pressing down gently around them like a blanket woven from things they hadn't yet said. That night, Elena didn't return to her bed. She curled up on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the envelope from Adrian still in her hand. It was the first time anyone had seen danger approaching and chosen not to rescue her, not to contain her, but simply stood beside her. That meant more than protection ever could. The morning after she'd seen Dean on the street and after Adrian's quiet note had slipped beneath her door, something in Elena shifted. Not suddenly, not loudly, but in that slow, inevitable way that gravity teaches you how to fall differently. She no longer moved through Locke Tower like a guest trying not to leave footprints. She walked like the space had learned her rhythm. She stopped avoiding her reflection, started saying no, not from fear, but from certainty. And when she met her own eyes in the mirror, she no longer saw a girl the world had tried to erase. She saw someone who had crawled out of silence and taught herself how to be named again. The invitation to the Locke International Summit arrived 2 days later. She opened it barefoot, seated cross-legged on the kitchen counter, still wrapped in the apartment's soft robe. The card was thick, heavy, embossed in silver. Her name was printed not with a title, not as a guest or token or participant, just Elena Wade, as if that was enough. It didn't feel like a request. It felt like a challenge. Show up as yourself. And so she did. The days that followed were filled with preparations, but not hers. Vivian returned, this time with a team stylists, consultants, a communications coach. Elena declined them all. She let them leave the clothing, but she chose what to wear. She let them offer notes, but she wrote her own. She read the internal reports, memorized policy figures, studied the summit's themes. She wasn't here to smile and blend in. If they wanted her presence, they'd get her voice. Adrian didn't interfere. He watched from a distance, saying nothing when she declined the car service for the presummit dinner. She took the train, alone, arrived without fanfare, without apology. And when she entered the room, she knew exactly what they were thinking, that she didn't belong, that she was a variable no one could predict, a disruption dressed as a girl who should have been invisible. But she wasn't invisible anymore, and she had no intention of going back. No one said it to her face, but she saw it in their eyes, the way they paused a second too long, the way their curiosity leaned toward caution. Because beneath Elena's quiet presence was something none of them wanted to confront. She had survived things their privilege couldn't comprehend, and that made her dangerous, in all the ways power fears most. The Locke International Summit unfolded inside a vast glass pavilion on the lake's edge, a sleek, modern sanctuary for global thinkers, urban technologists, and polished strategists. Every hallway hummed with ambition. Every handshake masked a calculation. Elena arrived in a tailored black jumpsuit, minimalist, sharp, unyielding, a high collar, silver-lined seams. Nothing delicate, nothing to soften her for the cameras. Adrian met her just inside the threshold. He didn't reach for her arm. He didn't try to position her. He just met her gaze and said, "Don't let them make you justify yourself." She didn't. Panel after panel on urban displacement, algorithmic justice, post-crisis frameworks, she showed up not as a token, not as a prop, but as a voice. She asked precise questions, pushed against assumptions, and listened hard enough to make others do the same. They stopped calling her the girl from nowhere. They started trying to remember where they had seen her before. When a journalist approached with a rehearsed smirk and asked if she felt like a symbol, Elena didn't flinch. "Symbols don't speak," she said. "I do." That night, during the gala reception, Elena slipped away to the rooftop terrace. The city below shimmered. The lake stretched out like dark silk under a broken sky. She stood still, wind brushing her hair across her cheek. Eyes closed, not for drama, but for stillness. She didn't need applause. She didn't crave permission. She just needed a breath, a moment to realize that she had come this far and never once apologized for it. When she opened her eyes, Adrian was already there. No entrance, no announcement, just his presence silent, steady. The collar of his shirt loosened, his coat unfastened, a man slightly undone, They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Then he said, "You belonged in every space you entered today. I never asked to." She replied, "That's what gave it weight." She turned toward him fully. "Why did you really put me up there? I wanted them to see what I've seen." He paused. "And maybe I wanted you to see it too." She didn't smile, but something behind her eyes softened. "I didn't need your validation." "Adrian, I know," he said, "but I needed to give it." She stepped closer, a half step that said more than words. And now what she spoke with certainty. Not anger. "I'm not a mystery anymore. Not your little disruption. Not the girl in torn shoes and shadows. You were never any of those things. You saw me when I was raw." She said, "But I'm not raw anymore. I'm not here to be shaped." He nodded slowly. "I don't want to shape you. I want to stand beside you." She looked at him, really looked, and saw past the sharp angles of control he wore like armor. She saw the weight he carried in silence, the guilt, the restraint, the ache of someone who had built walls so strong. He didn't know how to open the door until her. "You built this world to hold chaos in check," she said, "and then you let me walk into it. Not as a guest," he said, "as a force, and maybe now, as something more." Elena's voice dropped. "I don't know how to do this. Neither do I," he admitted. "But I know what happens when I let you leave a room without telling you the truth." She didn't move. There was no grand gesture, no perfectly timed embrace, just two people standing in the open, stripped of pretense. And in that silence, something whole was beginning. There was no vow exchanged. No hand reached out. No cinematic promise whispered between them. Only a closeness unspoken, steady, that said more than any line ever could. She didn't give him her hand, but she didn't walk away either. That night, Elena finally lay down on the bed she had refused to claim since her first night in the tower. She didn't change. She simply stretched across the center, fully clothed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. No tension in her limbs. No urgency in her chest. For the first time, she felt something beyond strength. She felt calm. And for a girl who had lived her entire life armored by survival, calm felt like the most radical form of love. She didn't sleep through the night, not from fear, not from echoes of an old life. Her mind was sharp, awake, buzzing not with anxiety, but with clarity, like every nerve had found a new frequency. The apartment was quiet, still. But not the kind of stillness that felt like waiting for a door to crash open. This silence belonged to her now. She had earned it. When the first silver threads of morning crept across the sky, Elena got up. She walked barefoot to the kitchen and made coffee not out of need, but ritual. There was something grounding about the warmth of it in her hands, the soft steam rising. She stood by the window, watching light catch on the countertops and steel fixtures, and realized this place wasn't just safe, it was hers, not because of what it contained, but because of what it allowed: unbraced breath, quiet dignity, room to exist. Adrian stepped in his presence sharp, immediate, like the sudden shift in air before a storm breaks. He glanced at each of them in turn. Elena, Declan, Vivian, his gaze slicing through the room's tension like a blade. "What's going on?" he asked. Declan rose. "We're discussing Elena's possible role in the next phase of your role," Adrian cut in. "Is not to exploit the people we claim to elevate." Declan faltered. "Adrian, we're talking about impact, scalability." "No," Adrian said flatly. "You're talking about her like she's an initiative. She's not." Declan's mouth thinned. He gave a single stiff nod and exited without another word. Vivian met Adrian's eyes, gave a brief nod of her own, and followed. The door shut. Silence. Just the two of them now. Elena turned to face him fully. You let him into this room, and I got him out of it. I didn't need you to fight for me. I know, he said, but I still will. She folded her arms, still bracing. Why didn't you tell me they were planning this? Because I didn't know, he said, and for once, there was no edge in his voice. Not until this morning. She believed him, even when she didn't want to. And that made it worse, because it meant the problem wasn't just Adrian. It was the machine that built him. He took a step closer. You're not fading back into the margins. I wasn't planning to. I mean, not under my name, not under my silence. I didn't bring you here to quiet you. I brought you here because I knew, eventually, your voice would outgrow mine. She didn't blink at the compliment. She didn't need praise. She needed assurance, and he knew that. I'll shut it down, Adrian said softly. Whatever path they try to take through you, I'll block it. Burn it. Whatever it takes. Elena's voice was low but sharp. What do you want in return? He looked at her then, and something inside him dropped its armor. Nothing, he said. Just to be there. Beside you. When you take what's yours. Her throat tightened. But she said nothing. Not yet. Not while she was still burning from the knowledge that someone had tried to brand her story. Not when she had fought so hard not to be reduced to a narrative with a bow on top. That night, Elena returned to the apartment, and for the first time in weeks, she wrote, not in a journal, not for anyone else, a letter to herself, a reckoning, a truth. You are not proof. You are not a win on someone's whiteboard. You are fire that lit itself. You do not owe the world an explanation for how you burn. She folded the letter and slipped it under her pillow. She didn't need to read it again. The words had already settled into her bones. She slept. Fully. Deeply. Without interruption. When morning came, sunlight spilled across the apartment, soft and gold, just like always. But this time, she didn't just notice it. She let it touch her. Let it wrap around her skin. Let it wake her not as a signal to fight, but as a reminder she belonged to herself now. And she wasn't apologizing for it. She didn't spring from the bed like she used to, back when stillness felt dangerous, when her body flinched before her mind could remember there was no threat waiting. No. This morning, Elena lay still, arms resting across her stomach, soft sheets tangled around her legs. She watched the light shift gently across the ceiling, and for once, she let herself breathe all the way in. It was the final day of her official residency at Locke Tower, and she wasn't afraid of what came next. The past month had passed like a storm disguised as stillness. Final meetings, press interviews she chose to give on her own terms, quiet conversations in back rooms where real decisions happened. After she'd refused Declan's proposal to monetize her life, the ripples were immediate. Word moved fast. She wasn't a convenient symbol anymore. She was a problem, and that made her powerful. She became valuable not because she played along, but because she walked away when she was expected to comply. And then, there was Adrian. Since that day in the strategy room, he had kept his distance. Not cold, not absent. Present in the way only someone who understood restraint could be. They saw each other often, passing glances, shared space, unspoken things. But he never crossed the line. He watched her become more than he had once imagined, and she saw the weight he carried, not because of desire, but because he finally understood the difference between possession and presence. For the first time in her life, Elena felt what it meant to be chosen without being claimed. She moved slowly through the apartment that morning. Packing didn't take long. A few outfits, 2 worn books. The notebooks she'd filled with questions and plans, words no one else would ever see. Everything else it had been given, and she would leave it behind. She didn't want to carry symbols of change. She wanted to carry the substance of it. Just after 9, a knock. Vivian stood outside. Not stiff, not cold. There was something almost reverent in her posture today. In one hand, a digital folder. In the other, a small, plain box. "You're expected in the atrium at 10, she said quietly. "Final debrief with the board. They want to hear from you. No scripts? No handlers?" "Good," Elena replied. "I don't do scripts." Vivian extended the box. "This is from Adrian. He didn't leave a note, just said it's your choice." Elena closed the door, placed the box on the kitchen counter, and opened it. Inside, a single silver key on a leather cord, and a card, no names, just a set of coordinates, handwritten. She didn't need to look them up. She knew the place. An old firehouse on the city's west side, abandoned, forgotten. She had passed it 100 times when she had nowhere to sleep, a ghost moving through places no one cared to see. Now, it was hers. Or could be, if she chose it. By the time Elena stepped into the glass-walled atrium, her decision was already made. The boardroom was stark. Formal 7 members seated at a long table, tablets in hand, expressions sharpened by protocol. They offered her a seat. At the far end, not the center. She didn't mind. She wasn't here to be centered. She was here because she had centered herself. Elena didn't come to the boardroom to be inspirational. She came to be clear. They asked questions about her experience, the structure, the outcomes, the framework. She answered without decoration. She spoke about the weight of freedom, how real support isn't always what's given, but what's not taken away. She told them the truth they hadn't scripted for, that she learned more in the space between the plans, more in the quiet than in the programming. That being left alone to understand her mind, her rhythm, her boundaries, that was the real gift. When they asked what came next, she told them about the firehouse. She told them she would turn it into something that didn't ask girls like her to smile for brochures, a place for those who didn't want to be saved, only seen. No slogans, no campaigns, just a door that stayed open. Some nodded, some stayed silent. She didn't need their approval. She had stopped needing that a long time ago. When the meeting ended, Elena stepped outside Locke Tower, onto the same stretch of sidewalk where everything had started. The city swelled around her, loud, indifferent, alive. The scent of asphalt, roasted coffee, too many dreams, no handlers, no glass above, no one watching, just her, right there on the street, whole. Then Adrian appeared beside her, no suit, no title pressed into his collar. Just a man in a dark coat, his expression quiet, softened by something that looked a lot like peace. "You opened the box," he said. She nodded. "You gave me a place. I owed you one. Somewhere that's yours." She looked at him. "Steady. You gave me space. Then a key. What do you want from me?" He hesitated. Then, a chance. A chance at what? At not ruining this. She didn't smile. Not yet. But the air between them had changed, open now. Soft-edged. No longer braced for rejection. "You're not used to being chosen without a price," she said. "And you're not used to being chosen just for being you," he replied. They stood there, not clinging to the past, not rushing into what came next, just being. "I'm not the girl you saw on the sidewalk," she told him. "I know." He said, "That's why I want to meet the woman you've become." This time, she did smile. Small. Honest. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the silver key, and held it between them. "I'm going to build something there," she said. "Not just walls, not just programs, a place with memory, with fire. I want to see it," he said. "Then show up," she answered. "Not as a CEO, not as a benefactor, just as you. I can do that." And as they stood side by side, not as a girl rescued, not as a man redeemed, but as two people stripped of performance, Elena realized this journey had never been about being chosen by someone else. It had been about choosing herself, freely, finally, and deciding what was worth letting in. This time, she chose, and she didn't choose safety. She chose power earned, not gifted. She chose connection, not from obligation, but from truth. And she chose a kind of love that wasn't offered from a pedestal, but one that had grown quietly, steadily in the space between silence and understanding. The kind she would never trade, the kind that belonged to her. She didn't walk away with applause. She didn't leave as someone's project, someone's proof, someone's pride. She left as herself. Not the girl they underestimated, not the woman they tried to define, but as a force that refused to be packaged, sold, or silenced. Elena didn't choose the safest path. She chose the truest one, and in doing so, she reminded us all that healing isn't always soft, that power doesn't always shout, and that sometimes the greatest kind of love is simply being seen and still allowed to be free. So if this story made you feel something, if it echoed a truth you didn't know you needed, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Because somewhere out there, someone else is still waiting to remember they were never just a symbol. They were always a choice. And maybe this is the story that helps them see it.